The laughter came first. Not loud, not cruel at the surface, but sharp enough to sting. The husband leaned back in his chair, surrounded by friends and relatives, his voice carrying easily across the room. He gestured toward his wife as if she were part of the furniture. "You know," he said with a smirk, "some people don't complain about food because they grew up eating nothing." A few chuckles followed. Eyes turned toward her. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. Her dress was simple, clean, modest, unimpressive to people who measured worth in labels. Someone whispered about her shoes. Another joked about how grateful she should be to have married into comfort. The husband added more, each word carefully wrapped as humor comments about her village accent, her silence at gatherings, the way she never asked for money. "She's not used to luxury," he said casually. "Poverty teaches discipline." The room accepted the story he told. A poor woman saved by marriage, a man generous enough to lift her from nothing. In their eyes, she was small, dependent, powerless. The camera lingers on her face. No tears, no anger, just stillness. When someone waits for her to respond, she doesn't. When the mockery sharpens, she doesn't defend herself. Not because she can't, but because she won't. Her eyes lower briefly, not in shame, but restraint. A quiet dignity settles around her, heavy and unreadable. The husband mistakes her silence for surrender. He laughs again, louder this time, enjoying the approval. He has no idea that every word he speaks is digging a hole he cannot see. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was inheritance. The story unfolds in a city where glass towers rise beside old markets, where car horns echo past ancestral compounds, and tradition still whispers beneath the noise of modern life. It is an African city in motion, ambitious, proud, and deeply aware of status. Here, what you wear, where you come from, and who knows your name can decide how you are treated long before you speak a single word. At the center of this city lives a couple who, on the surface, seem perfectly matched. The husband is loud and confident, a man fueled by ambition and recognition. He measures success in numbers, connections, and the respect he commands in public spaces. He enjoys being seen as the provider, the one who made it, the man others admire and envy. His voice fills rooms, and he rarely doubts himself. His wife is his opposite. She moves quietly through the world, reserved, polite, and deeply respectful. She listens more than she speaks. She dresses simply, avoids attention, and never competes for the spotlight. To many, her silence is mistaken for insecurity. Her humility is confused for lack of confidence. In a society that rewards visibility, she becomes easy to overlook. The tension between them was built long before the marriage began. He married her believing she was poor lucky to be chosen, fortunate to be lifted into comfort. In his mind, he was the benefactor. The power was his. Financially, socially, emotionally, he believed he stood above her in every way. And slowly, that belief shaped how he treated her. This story is not just about a marriage. It is about assumptions that harden into arrogance, about pride that blinds people to truth, and about the danger of judging someone's worth by what they show rather than what they carry unseen. They met the way many modern love stories in the city begin, through proximity, convenience, and quiet curiosity rather than fireworks. She worked in a modest office not far from one of his business sites. He noticed her not because she demanded attention, but because she never did. While others laughed loudly or dressed to be seen, she moved calmly, greeting people with respect, speaking only when necessary. To him, that humility felt refreshing at first. In a world full of noise, her silence seemed like peace. But from the beginning, he misunderstood what he was seeing. He assumed her quiet nature meant she lacked confidence. He believed her politeness came from gratitude, not self-control. When she listened more than she spoke, he mistook it for submission. He began to see himself as the stronger presence, the one with direction, power, and purpose. And without realizing it, he built the foundation of their relationship on an untested belief that he was above her. During their courtship, he paid for everything. He insisted on it. Restaurants, transport, gifts. Each payment quietly reinforced the story he was telling himself. When she offered to contribute, he laughed it off. "Save your money," he would say casually, not knowing she didn't need to save at all. To him, generosity felt like authority. To her, it was simply his choice. She never corrected his assumptions, not because she was hiding, but because she believed love should exist without explanations. She wanted to be chosen for who she was, not what she owned or represented. So she let him believe the version of her that made him comfortable. The marriage followed quickly. His family approved easily. She was respectful, soft-spoken, and manageable. There were no rumors, no drama, no demands. Elders praised her upbringing. Friends congratulated him. "You chose well," they told him. "A woman like that will never challenge you." He smiled, proud of the compliment. The early signs of disrespect appeared quietly, the way most dangerous things do. He began controlling the household finances without discussion, not out of necessity, but habit. He gave her money instead of sharing it, an allowance instead of access. When she questioned the decision just once, he reminded her that he was the provider. "I know how money works," he said. "Leave that to me." Over time, her opinions became optional. If she suggested something different, he waved it away. If she disagreed, he joked about her being too simple to understand big matters. Sometimes it happened in private. Other times, in front of others, disguised as humor. Each time, the message was the same. Your voice is not required here. She noticed. She felt it. But she remained composed. In her world, she had been taught restraint. Strength expressed quietly. Wisdom shared only when welcomed. She had seen loud people collapse under their own pride. She believed time revealed truth better than arguments ever could. So she watched and waited. Outside the marriage, the pressure grew heavier. Friends, relatives, older women pulled her aside. When she hinted at discomfort, they responded with the same advice, spoken with care but rooted in tradition. Endure. All marriages are like this. A good wife is patient. Don't answer a man too much. In their eyes, marriage was not a place for protest. It was a test of silence. They reminded her that respect kept homes intact, that ego broke families, that endurance was love in its highest form. And so, each time she felt diminished, she swallowed her words and reminded herself that patience was not weakness. It was strategy. The husband interpreted her endurance exactly the wrong way. Each moment she stayed quiet confirmed his belief that he was right, that his dominance was natural, that her role was to adapt, not challenge. He grew more confident, more careless with his words, more public with his superiority. He spoke about her background as if it were a favor he had rescued her from. He told stories that painted himself as the hero and her as the beneficiary. What he never questioned was why she never asked for more, why she never complained, why she never depended on him the way he expected. He assumed gratitude explained everything. But assumptions are dangerous. They grow unchecked. They become truth in the minds of those who benefit from them. And in this marriage, the greatest assumption of all was this, that silence meant acceptance, and humility meant having nothing to lose. The humiliation did not begin with shouting. It arrived disguised as jokes, laughter, and casual remarks made loud enough for everyone to hear. At family gatherings, when chairs were arranged in wide circles and food was served in abundance, the husband often became the center of attention. He enjoyed performing, telling stories, exaggerating his success, reminding everyone how far he had come. And somewhere in those stories, his wife always appeared as a punchline. He would laugh and say things like, "When I met her, She didn't even know this kind of food, or she's simple village life teaches you to accept whatever comes. The room would erupt in polite laughter. Some nodded knowingly. Others joined in, adding their own comments about her quiet nature, her modest clothes, her refusal to compete with other women. They spoke about her as if she were not sitting just a few steps away. Friends teased him openly. "You really upgraded her life," one would say. Another joked, "She must thank you every day." And he would smile, chest lifted, enjoying the image of himself as a savior. He bragged about saving her from poverty, about giving her a life she could never have imagined. Each word fed his pride and stripped her of dignity. She never corrected him. Not once did she interrupt. Not once did she raise her voice or expose the lie. She simply smiled faintly or kept her eyes lowered, allowing the conversation to pass over her like wind over still water. To those watching, it looked like fear, like dependence, like a woman who knew her place and was afraid to lose it. But fear had nothing to do with it. Her silence was a decision, a line she chose not to cross, not because she was powerless, but because she understood power differently. She believed that truth, when revealed too early, became noise. She believed some lessons were better learned through consequence, not correction. And most of all, she believed that defending herself in front of people who had already judged her would only entertain them further. So she endured the laughter without internalizing it. She absorbed the insults without wearing them. Inside, she felt the weight, but not the wound. At night, when the house was quiet and the city lights flickered through the curtains, the pain became more private. She would sit alone, replaying moments from the day. Not in anger, but reflection. She asked herself questions he never thought to ask. How did love become hierarchy? When did marriage turn into performance? And why did respect disappear so easily when people believed someone had nothing? There were moments when even endurance felt heavy, when words lingered longer than they should, when she wondered if patience was being mistaken for permission. But each time, she reminded herself why she chose silence. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had somewhere else entirely. Small hints of that hidden world appeared occasionally. A phone call taken outside. A soft change in her voice, firmer, clearer, unfamiliar. Sometimes the call came late at night. Sometimes early in the morning. She would speak briefly, respectfully, and hang up without explanation. When asked who it was, she answered simply, "Family." The husband never pressed. In his mind, poor people didn't have complicated families. They didn't receive important calls. They didn't live lives beyond what was visible. His assumptions protected him from curiosity. Another thing puzzled him, though he never admitted it aloud. She rarely accepted money from him. When he offered extra cash, she thanked him but declined. When he insisted, she said she didn't need it. At first, he enjoyed this. It fed his narrative of her being low maintenance. But over time, it unsettled him. She never asked for shopping money, never begged, never panicked when expenses came up. If something was needed, it quietly appeared. If plans changed, she adjusted without complaint. It was as if money existed around her, but not through him. Still, he never questioned it deeply. Pride has a way of dulling curiosity. He preferred the story where he was in control. At gatherings, the mockery continued, sometimes sharper, sometimes crueler. A cousin once asked her directly how it felt to marry above her level. The room laughed before she could answer. She smiled politely and excused herself. In that moment, something shifted not in her expression, but in the air. A few people noticed. Most didn't. The husband followed her later, annoyed not concerned. "You're too sensitive," he said. "Learn to take jokes." She nodded, as she always did. And he walked away, satisfied that the issue was resolved. What he didn't see was that every insult was being recorded, not in anger, but in clarity. She was learning who people really were when they believed they held power. She was watching how easily respect vanished when wealth was assumed absent. She was observing, quietly, patiently. The mockery was public. The pain was private. But the silence between them was growing louder by the day. And somewhere beyond the laughter, beyond the assumptions, beyond the small world they believed she came from, a truth weighted, untouched, undeniable, and very close to the surface. Long before the city learned her name only as someone's quiet wife, her life had already passed through worlds far larger than anyone imagined. The story of her past was not one of lack, but of deliberate distance. A distance she chose. A life she stepped away from, not because she was forced, but because she refused to live without principles. She was born into power, real power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Her father was not just wealthy. He was influential. A man whose decisions shaped markets, whose phone calls crossed borders, whose name opened doors in boardrooms and ministries alike. His businesses stretched across industries, energy, construction, agriculture, finance. His reach extended beyond one country, touching ports, banks, and governments across continents. To the public, he was a symbol of success. To many, untouchable. But inside their home, wealth did not erase conflict. From a young age, she was raised differently from what people assumed rich children to be. Her father valued discipline, education, and responsibility. She learned early that money was a tool, not an identity. That respect could be bought, but dignity could not. As she grew older, she began to see the darker edges of power, the compromises, the quiet injustices justified in the name of growth and profit. The disagreement that changed everything did not happen overnight. It built slowly, across years of questions she asked and answers she didn't accept. She challenged decisions that hurt communities. She questioned partnerships that ignored human cost. She asked why success always required someone else's silence. Her father saw this as naivety. She saw it as conscience. The final argument was calm but final. She refused to stand beside actions she couldn't defend. He believed loyalty meant obedience. She believed loyalty meant truth. When neither would bend, the distance between them became permanent. She left quietly. No dramatic exit. No public statement. No inheritance fight. She walked away from comfort, security, and an identity the world would have envied. Not because she hated her father, but because she could not become what power was asking her to be. She chose independence over inheritance, anonymity over advantage. And her father, proud and unyielding, let her go. Years passed. The world continued to credit his success to strategy and strength, but quietly, he watched her from a distance. He saw how she lived without asking for help, how she built her life without a shadow, how she refused to use his name even when it would have made everything easier. Where others would have returned begging, she did not. That distance became respect. When she later married, she did not inform him, not because she feared his reaction, but because she wanted her marriage to exist free of power, free of protection, free of leverage. She wanted to be chosen as a woman, not as an advantage. That was why she hid the truth. She didn't want love that bowed to wealth. She didn't want obedience disguised as affection. She didn't want respect enforced by status. She wanted to see how people behaved when they thought she had nothing to offer but herself. So she never mentioned her past, never corrected assumptions, never explained the quiet confidence that came from knowing she could walk away from anything at any time. She lived simply, intentionally. She let people underestimate her because it revealed who they truly were. The occasional phone calls were not secrets, they were boundaries. Conversations with family members still loyal to her father, advisors who checked in, lawyers who updated her, accounts that remained untouched, assets that grew without her presence, empires that carried her name quietly in documents she never needed to open. The wealth never left her. She left the wealth. Her refusal to accept money from her husband was not pride, it was principle. She had promised herself long ago that she would never shrink under someone else's control again, that she would never owe silence in exchange for provision. She wanted partnership, not permission. What hurt the most was not the mockery, it was the irony. She had walked away from a world where people feared her father's power, only to be belittled by people who believed she had none. She had rejected luxury to protect her values, only to be treated as if dignity required proof. Still, she stayed silent, because she wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was waiting to be revealed. And in a world that had mistaken restraint for weakness, humility for emptiness, and silence for surrender, the truth of her past remained untouched, vast, powerful, and patiently approaching the moment when it could no longer be ignored. The breaking point did not arrive with shouting or chaos. It came quietly, wrapped in celebration, in a space where respect should have lived, but didn't. It was a public event, larger than the usual family gatherings. Colleagues, extended relatives, friends of friends. A room filled with ambition and appearances. The kind of place where people measured worth by volume and confidence by cruelty. The husband was in rare form that night. He had secured a new business deal and felt untouchable. His voice carried across the room as he spoke about success, discipline, and sacrifice. As always, he positioned himself as the example. And as always, his wife became part of the story, not as a partner, but as a contrast. At first, the jokes were familiar. Comments about how far he had brought her, about how marriage had changed her life. Laughter followed, easy and careless. She stood beside him, composed, her expression unreadable. People watched her the way they always did, expecting silence, expecting acceptance. Then he crossed the line. Someone asked her a direct question, simple, respectful. Before she could answer, he interrupted. "Don't put her on the spot," he said loudly. "She's not used to conversations like this. Some people are born into exposure. Others are born into survival." The room went quiet for half a second, just long enough for discomfort to form. Then he continued. "I had to teach her everything, how to speak, how to sit, how to belong." The words landed heavier than laughter ever could. This was no longer a joke. It was erasure. Something shifted in her posture, not dramatically, but decisively. She inhaled slowly. For the first time, she turned fully toward him, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with clarity, the kind that unsettles people who rely on control. She spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, low enough that people leaned in instead of recoiling. "That's not true," she said. No explanation, no defense. Just truth, placed gently on the table between them. The room froze. She continued, just one sentence more. "Be careful how you speak about me, especially in public." There was no threat in her tone, no raised voice, no emotion he could accuse her of. It was not a warning wrapped in anger. It was a boundary, clearly drawn. Silence followed, thick, uncomfortable. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because laughter had always worked before. He waved his hand dismissively. "You see?" he said to the room. "Now she's learning confidence." The tension broke unevenly. A few people laughed. Others looked away. Some sensed something had gone wrong, but didn't know how to name it. She said nothing else. She didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't follow him or apologize. She simply stepped back, her face calm, her dignity intact. But those who were watching closely noticed something different now. Her silence no longer looked passive. It looked deliberate. The husband felt victorious. In his mind, he had restored order. He believed he had reminded everyone where power sat. He didn't notice that his laughter sounded forced, that his confidence cracked, just enough to be heard. What he didn't understand was that lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. That moment marked the end of her patience, Not her endurance, but her waiting. She had given him space to learn, to adjust, to see her. He had chosen pride instead. Publicly. Clearly. Without hesitation. Later that night, she didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She made a phone call. Short. Quiet. Respectful. The same kind of call she had made before, but this time, the tone was different. Final. Certain. He noticed the call but ignored it. Pride told him it didn't matter. Pride told him he was still in control. But viewers, those watching the story unfold, could feel it now. The shift. The tightening of the air before a storm. The calm before something irreversible. Her silence no longer felt like patience. It felt like preparation. The husband went to bed believing the night had ended in his favor. It hadn't, because what he mistook for a small moment, a joke, a laugh, a dismissal, was the moment everything changed. And while he laughed it off, the world around him had already begun to tilt. Something was coming. Not loudly, not violently, but with the kind of force that doesn't need to raise its voice to be felt. The arrival did not come with noise at first. It came with precision. The event was already underway when the convoy entered the ground sleek. Black vehicles moving slowly, deliberately, as if time itself had been instructed to step aside. Security personnel exited first, scanning calmly, efficiently. No rush, no spectacle, just control. Conversations began to fade as people noticed something was different, important, out of place among borrowed confidence and rented prestige. Then he stepped out. The father did not look like a man who needed to announce who he was. His presence did that for him. Tall, composed, dressed simply but immaculately, he moved with the ease of someone long accustomed to power. Not the loud power of attention, but the quiet authority that reshapes rooms without permission. People stood without realizing they were doing so. Phones lowered. Voices softened. The wife saw him immediately. She did not rush forward. She did not react. She simply inclined her head subtle, respectful. A gesture not of fear or obedience, but recognition. Father and daughter met eyes for a brief moment. In that look lived years of distance, principle, and unspoken understanding. He nodded once. That was all. The husband, confused and irritated, stepped forward. "Can we help you?" he asked, half smiling, already annoyed that attention had shifted away from him. He had no idea who he was addressing. The father turned toward him slowly. "I believe," he said calmly, "you are married to my daughter." The words landed softly, but they shook the room. Laughter died instantly. People exchanged glances. The husband's smile stiffened. "I'm sorry," he said, chuckling uncertainly. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake," the father replied. His voice was even, measured, not angry, not emotional, which somehow made it far more devastating. "She chose not to introduce me earlier. That was her decision. I respected it." Silence spread. The father continued, addressing the husband directly, but not aggressively. "I've listened," he said. "I've observed. I've heard how you speak about her, how you define her, how you reduce her." The husband tried to interrupt, to laugh it off again, but the father raised a single hand. Not sharply, just enough. "Let me finish." He turned slightly, gesturing toward his daughter without touching her. "You believe you rescued her from poverty, that you elevated her life, that she owes you gratitude." The room was frozen now. "She walked away," the father said, "from an inheritance valued at over $20 billion. She walked away from influence, protection, and a name that commands entire industries." He paused, letting the number settle, not for shock, but for truth. "She did not leave because she was ungrateful. She left because she has principles." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths. Others stared at her, suddenly seeing her for the first time. "She is the sole heir," the father added quietly. Not because I demanded it, but because she earned it. By choosing dignity over dominance, values over vanity. No one spoke. The husband's face drained of color. His mind raced backward through every joke, every insult, every moment of mockery. The laughter he had relied on now echoed back at him as humiliation. He tried to speak, but words failed him. For the first time, he was truly silent. "You misunderstood her silence," the father continued, his tone unchanged. "You thought it meant submission. You thought humility meant absence of power. You thought wealth always announces itself." He turned fully toward the husband now. "That was your mistake." The room felt impossibly still. "She never corrected you," the father said, "because she wanted to see who you were when you believed she had nothing." His gaze sharpened, not in anger, but disappointment. "You showed her." The wife had not moved. She had not smiled. She had not looked vindicated. There was no triumph in her expression, only calm, as if this moment had already passed through her long before it arrived. The father stepped back, signaling the end of the conversation. No threats, no demands, no raised voice. He had not needed any of it. Around them, people stood in stunned silence. Friends who had laughed avoided eye contact. Relatives who had advised endurance now understood the cost of their assumptions. Respect, once withheld, suddenly rushed in, but too late. The husband finally understood. He had mocked someone far beyond him, not in money alone, but in restraint, in character, in power that did not need permission to exist. And as the convoy prepared to leave, the room remained silent, not because it was commanded to be, but because no one knew how to speak after truth had stripped the masks away. The revelation was complete, not with drama, but with dignity. The aftermath did not explode the way many expected. There was no shouting match, no public apology forced out of fear, no dramatic collapse. What followed was quieter and far more revealing. The power in the room had shifted, not because money was announced, but because truth had arrived. The same people who had laughed now stood awkwardly, unsure where to place their eyes. Conversations that once flowed confidently now stalled. Compliments felt heavy, delayed, dishonest. Respect, it turned out, had always been conditional, offered only when people believed it was deserved by status, not humanity. The husband felt it first. The way people spoke to him changed. Not openly, not immediately, but subtly. Fewer laughs. Less agreement. Eyes that once admired now measured. He was still the same man, with the same achievements, yet something essential had slipped away. Authority built on superiority does not survive exposure. Once stripped, it cannot be reclaimed. At home, the silence was different now. Thicker. Honest. He attempted explanations, awkward justifications framed as misunderstandings. He spoke of pressure, of jokes taken too far, of intentions that were never meant to hurt. But words spoken too late lose their weight. She listened calmly, as she always had. The difference was that now, she no longer absorbed the burden of his discomfort. She did not celebrate. She did not threaten. She did not humiliate him in return. There was no revenge in her posture, no satisfaction in her eyes. Only clarity. She spoke once more quietly, firmly, without emotion. She explained what he had refused to see all along, that respect given only when power is visible is not respect at all. That love built on hierarchy becomes cruelty. That silence, when misunderstood, becomes dangerous, not for the silent, but for those who assume. She made her stance clear. Not as an ultimatum, as a truth. She would not argue for dignity. She would not shrink to preserve comfort. She would not stay where she was only valued when underestimated. What happened next was not shown as spectacle, because real consequences rarely are. Some relationships did not survive. Others were forced to change. The marriage itself stood at a crossroads, not defined by wealth, but by accountability. Whether it endured or ended mattered less than what had already been revealed. Character does not appear under control. It appears when control is lost. Around them, lessons settled slowly. People who had advised her to endure began to question their own counsel. How many times had patience been used to excuse disrespect? How often had tradition been weaponized against dignity? How many silences had been misread as weakness simply because it was convenient? The story did not end with a villain destroyed or a hero crowned. It ended with mirrors placed in front of everyone watching. Because this was never just her story. It was about how easily we reduce people when we think they have nothing. How quickly pride convinces us that louder means stronger, richer means better, visible means worthy. It was about how society teaches us to respect power, but not restraint. Wealth does not always announce itself. Strength does not always raise its voice. And silence, when chosen, can carry more force than noise ever could. Pride blinds faster than poverty. It convinces people they are untouchable. It silences curiosity. It replaces empathy with assumption. And by the time truth arrives, it is often too late to undo what was revealed in the absence of it. The wife did not win because she was rich. She won because she refused to become small to make others comfortable. Because she understood that dignity does not need witnesses to exist. And as the story closes, the question lingers not directed at the husband alone, but at everyone who watched, listened, laughed, or stayed silent alongside him. How many people do we disrespect? Simply because we think they have nothing? The answer is uncomfortable. And that is exactly the point.